Hi, welcome to the campaign update from myself and our team. Sherry DeNovo was MPP, Parkdale High Park, and now candidate for that job. My fourth election in 8 years. So looking forward to having this opportunity really to knock on your door, say hello to you, meet people that I haven't touched base with for a while. Uh, Two things. Please tweet me any questions you have. We are live, so I'm responding in real time. And you can tweet them to at CHERIDINOVO. You can also send them to my Facebook site, of course, of the same name. And of course, if you want to come and volunteer, donate, take a sign, please reach my campaign office. I'm going to give you the phone number. It's 647-427-5848. And we're situated on Dundas, just east of Roncesvalles, just before you get to Sorauren on the south side. You'll see the signs, of course, when you get there. Which brings me to where we are, and we're in this fabulous place called the Bell Jar Cafe. Wonderful cafe, lovely sandwiches and baked treats, also licensed later on, and of course a coffee shop during the day. So if you live anywhere around here within walking distance, please, again, go to your local business and support them. That's one of the wonderful things about doing this Google Hangout, is that we bring attention to some of our incredible local indie business. And so I'm delighted to be here. And this, by the way, is just across the street from our campaign office. So you can do a little bit of both. Have a great coffee, have a nice meal, and come say hi to the incredibly hardworking gang that are trying. It's not just about getting me reelected. It's really about standing up and fighting for this community in Parkdale High Park. I also want to send a shout out to my opponents in this race, to the Liberal candidate and to the Progressive Conservative candidate. Anybody who puts themselves forward in a campaign for public office is taking on a lot of work, a lot of responsibility, and ultimately it's all to serve the public. So we are public servants, and I give them the nod as well. Welcome to the race. We're going to have some, I hope, some fun and some good debates, and it's going to be 5 weeks of campaigning. Issues. I really want to highlight the local issues first, because those are the ones I think that will change the lives or not of our residents here in Parkdale High Park. Two key issues that I'm hearing most places. One is about, it seems to be unstoppable development without a great deal of community input. Despite the good efforts of our two city councillors, the problem in the province of Ontario is that those who would develop and don't want to be consultative in their development practices can always take their case to the Ontario Municipal Board. Now, you understand that at that board, unelected, unaccountable, that their developer can go with a lawyer, planner, on payroll, up against a community group who are taking the day off work. This should not be allowed. We have a city planning department. They do wonderful work. We need to allow them to do their work. There's an appeal process already. And I'll tell you why this is such a big concern. We've heard this when we have been in the condos south on the Queensway, as well as in just folks' homes anywhere around the Bloor West High Park area and into Swansea. People are very concerned that the jewel of Parkdale High Park, will end up being ringed around with condos. We do not want that. There's nothing wrong with development. We need intensification in the city. It's long been our practice, but we need to make sure that it's done responsibly, and we need to make sure that we have the infrastructure. Many of these condos are being inhabited by families with little children. Our schools are already at their maximum capacity. In fact, we fought, and I fought, for increased funding for our 3 most overcrowded schools. We got it for 2 of them. We got it for Swansea and Peel. Fortunately, we didn't get it for Runnymede. What this means is that children in the new development place, many quite a way outside the riding. This is unacceptable. It's not good environmentally. It's not good for families. And again, good planning would have prevented that from happening. The other huge issue, of course, particularly here on Dundas West, and of course in the Junction, and of course in Roncesvalles-Macdonell area down to Parkdale, the biggest issue, single issue, is the clean train issue. Just to remind folk that 25 2015, when we're going to be having hundreds of diesel trains running past our riding. There are only a few now, but there will be hundreds. Despite the fact that they're called Tier 4 diesel, they are still diesel, and as such will emit toxic fumes into the air in this riding. There are 64 schools along those tracks and a number of parks and public spaces. That's why it's so important that we keep our air clean. This is the single biggest community environmental issue. The Clean Train Coalition and I have been fighting this forever, and I was so pleased that Rick Ciccarelli gave me the nod and supporting me in this run, because we have fought for an environmental assessment. We won that fight. It came back unequivocally that these trains need to be electric. And yet the government is waffling. They didn't even promise in this last budget, which is, of course, just a series of promises to electrify by 2017. We have said we will make it a priority upon election. So it is a priority for me. It is a priority for the Democratic Party to electrify that air rail link. It's also a priority to make sure that there are stops along the way and that it's affordable so that people can use it as a transportation system as well as an air rail link. We've also called for a relief line as soon as possible. We've called for more buses, ASAP. Those could happen almost overnight. We need serious investment in our transit, and we need an electrified air rail link that serves the districts it passes through as well as wealthy tourists. That's essentially. It shouldn't just be for a 2-week sporting event, it should be onwards. So the question about development just dealt with that. And about the thousands of cranes. So we are on, and just to give you a little bit of background, just got a Twitter question about the development. We tabled, when I was first elected, I tabled a bill reforming the Ontario Municipal Board. We just tabled and passed another bill through second reading. It got to committee just before the House rose. The Liberals and the Conservatives teamed up to kill that bill. Now, why would they do such a thing? The simple reason is these are two parties that are heavily funded by developers. We as community activists can never really get a handle on our development if we are fighting against wealthy developers all the time. We shouldn't be. We should be all working together, actually. We should be working together for the best developments for our ridings. That's what should be happening. And the Ontario Municipal Board does not afford us that luxury. To make the grievance even worse, there have been occasions in the past where community group has gone up against a developer at the OMB and then been sued if they lost or if they won for legal costs that the developers incurred. That's absolutely ludicrous. Again, we tabled a bill, anti-SLAPP legislation, strategic lawsuits against public participation. The government picked up on that. Unfortunately, again, the government had 3 years to carry that, and they didn't. It died on the order paper because they didn't put enough heft behind it. Other issues that I'm hearing about in the riding. Education, a huge one, the overcrowding of our schools. As I said, I fought and won to keep our school swimming pools open, to get funding into our schools, did for 2, not for the 3rd. We need so much more. When all-day kindergarten was put into place, the funding was not put into place to support this. Our schools are crumbling. You only have to walk into our schools. And I can tell you, my children are grown up now, but when the state of the schools from their era to this is considerably downgraded. They need huge amounts of capital assistance to just maintain these aging physical structures, and we need every single one of them. I remember when I first ran 8 years ago, the Liberal government was threatening to close some of our schools. Can you imagine if that had happened? We fought back against that and won, and now we're overcrowded in almost every single one of our schools and need substantial investment. Also, I hear from young families, you can hear some of them in the background here at the Beljar Cafe. I hear from young families about the dire lack of childcare. We have one of the worst records in all of Canada for our childcare investment. In fact, the budget states it as if it were something to be proud of, that we have the worst per capita investment in all of our social services than any other province in Canada. This is under a Liberal government. So for those who are worried about progressive Conservatives cutting back on social investment, we already have the worst. It can't get much worse. It can always get worse, but we already have the worst in Canada. Childcare, again, Manitoba on one side, you can have childcare for $17 a day. Quebec on the other side, $7 a day. In Ontario, as you know, only about 1 in 8, 1 in 9 children even has a space, and it's ridiculously expensive, $1,500 usually up a month. This, of course, makes it very difficult for women to work. It is the number one, I would say, women's issue in this province right now. Prevents women from really reaching their full potential, and men. So this is something that we need, and we need it for our children's sake. There have been numerous scandals, of course, about unlicensed childcare, and parents are driven to unlicensed childcare because we don't have investment in childcare. That's the primary goal that we need to be shooting for. Larger issues that are in our province. It's good coffee first. And again, sitting in the Bell Jar Cafe, right across from our campaign office on Dundas Street East, just east of Ronces, west of Sorauren. Come visit. Some of the larger issues in this riding and in this province: poverty, unprecedented rates of poverty right now, right across Ontario. We are one of the wealthiest jurisdictions in the world. This should not be happening here. And unfortunately it is. I was raised in a city where there were no food banks, where there weren't shelters, where you could live on social assistance, where you could live, it was difficult, but you could live on minimum wage. Those days are long gone. Again, here we are, sitting in the midst of one of the wealthiest cities in North America and in the world, and yet we need food banks. People go hungry every day. You can see people living rough, as they're called, outside on the street because there's no housing. This has to be dealt with. And just saying you have a poverty plan doesn't mean you actually do anything about poverty. And we have seen that, which has really almost been insulting. You know, the 25 and 5 plan, I always say that, you know, in 5 years, was that to increase poverty by 25%? Because if it was, then we may be on target for it. If it was to reduce it, we are most certainly not. Another issue, of course, is housing. Housing, many years ago, when I was first elected, we did a visioning exercise for Parkdale, which is a priority neighborhood in our neighborhood. And the number one issue that people face is housing. It is very, very difficult to find affordable housing in the city of Toronto. Many people are being forced out of their housing. Rent control does not extend to buildings that were built after '91, and it does not extend to renters who live in condos, for example, many of whom we have met when we're out canvassing. That should not be the case. If you're going to have rent control, it should be for all tenants in the province of Ontario. Again, a very easy thing to have fixed. This government had 11 years to fix it and have not done that. And by the way, the current premier was at the cabinet table for every one of those 11 years. So that has not happened. We need that to happen. It's desperate now. And certainly for anyone who has young people at home that are trying to get the first house, their first apartment, and to try to own anything, the average price, I was just talking to a real estate agent last night at a public affair, and she said the average price for a house now in Toronto is over $900,000. This is not affordable. A large group of tenants. Where are people going to live? And this is the number one concern. And again, the government for the last 11 years has got out of the business of providing housing provincially. We constantly are blaming the federal government, which of course should have a national housing policy, but that's obviously under a Conservative government not coming anytime soon. But there's no excuse for the Liberal government in Ontario to not have moved on it themselves, and they have not. Co-ops are now under threat, of course, federally. What are we going to replace them with? Where is our affordable housing being built? Where is the investment in housing? Where is the investment in just rent supplements or anything to help people who are trying to move forward? I can tell you that that's the single biggest issue in South Parkdale. I've tried to address that with my inclusionary zoning bill, which would provide affordable housing without one tax dollar. Even that has been, again, shot down by this Liberal government. I've tabled that bill at least 3 times now, past second reading once. This government, successive housing ministers have refused to give it the light of day, and that again could provide housing by allowing our municipalities to ask developers to set aside a certain portion of their development for affordable housing. Could be rent-owned, could be rental. There's all sorts of different ways of doing it. If we had done that, we would be providing thousands of new units every year without a tax dollar being spent. So when the government cries poor, this is unacceptable. It wouldn't cost them anything to bring in something that is not prescriptive, that just allows municipalities, many of whom would love to be able to do this, to move on the housing file. So that's housing. Another question? Oh, WSIB, Workman's, yes. Well, as many of you know, for 10 days I went without food outside of the WSIB and was there supporting someone else on a hunger strike, Jimmy Velgakis, who is a worker from an injured worker from our riding, who has tried time and again to get his case reopened at the WSIB. They promised a hearing, it didn't happen. He ended up going on a hunger fast again. This time I did it with him. If he does it again, if we still don't get a hearing, mark my words, I will do it again with him until we get action for this poor man. I mean, he is in his 70s now, and all he's asking for is a fair hearing into the merits of his case. So we are working on that case, but it really highlights the issue of injured workers. Injured workers are having an increasingly difficult time trying to get their cases heard. And of course, I'm the gal who tabled the post-traumatic stress disorder bill, and that was for frontline workers, paramedics, firefighters, and police. And of course, we want to start there because those are the most obvious ones. These are the folk who run into danger when we run out. Trauma is part of their job. We ask them to go into traumatic situations. If they come down with PTSD, which many do, we have to cover them. It's already the law in Alberta. You've heard me speak about this before. For 2 years now, caseload has not gone up. In fact, the cost of administering these cases has gone down because it's streamlined. I've even heard from people who work, who of course obviously want to remain nameless, from inside WSIB that wish this legislation would pass. Again, it went past second reading. Again, I gave a last-ditch attempt on May 1st in the House to try to get unanimous consent on First Responders Day, and it was voted down by the Liberal government. So sad. Not the way we want to treat our first responders. So those are ways in which I'm engaging with the WSIB to get coverage for all workers, just two of the ways. And of course, reform is something we're always trying to work on. So that's that question. Please, again, if you have a question, I am live. I will respond to you live at CHERIDINOVO. And by the way, check my Facebook site out or my Twitter account or our website, our campaign website, to check out our video. It's really, I must say, beautifully done. You know, I hate watching myself on video, quite frankly, and probably share most viewers' concerns with that, but I think it's really well done. It gives you a real sense of this riding, how wonderful this riding is, Parkdale High Park, and gives you a sense of some of the issues and some of the people here. What else? Condo owners. We have been actually canvassing in condos, some of our newer condos. Condo owners in this province actually have less rights than tenants, so you know how bad that is. They have very little recourse if there's faulty development, poor property management. Mostly their recourse is to sue. Now, again, can you imagine a suit against a developer or a property management company when you are a single unit owner? It really is virtually impossible to go up against them. We really need something, and we have proposed a number of reforms. I put out a piece, we proposed a kind of condo board, a condo tribunal where people could go to resolve these issues, very much like the landlord-tenant tribunal, hopefully a little bit better functioning and more on the side of the condo owners, but they do need something. They need some protection. The Condo Act has not been updated since the 80s. Government's made all sorts of noises. They've struck a commission to look at this, and yet nothing has happened on it. Question. Please share my thoughts on recent announcements regarding developmentally disabled funding. Yeah, okay, of course. I sat on the Developmental Disabilities Committee and sat through all of the hearings and the testimony there. By the way, it was Christine Elliott, actually a Progressive Conservative's idea to set up that committee. She has a developmentally disabled son. The government didn't wait for our recommendations. We made over 40 recommendations. Number one of our recommendations was to eliminate all wait lists. Now, the government announced money for developmental disabilities. Let me tell you this, they did not commit to eliminate the wait list. That was number one. It was an all-party committee. We all agreed on that. The government did not commit to that. It's very important that you know this. And that money, again, they haven't committed to. It was simply a promise. Most of it, coming in the future, only if they got elected again. That is not worth the paper it's written on. Very much like the 70, that's right, 70 promises they made in this last budget, most of which didn't kick in, like their so-called pension plan, until 2017. That means we would have had to elect them twice more. Same with this developmental disability funding. Some of it is going out the door, but the vast bulk of it you'll never see. It's simply a promise, my friends. I wish it were otherwise, but here's the good news. That document that we tabled still exists. All the hearings exist, the testimony exists, the recommendations exist. They are there. And we know what they are, this all-party committee. And you have my word on this. Of course, if I'm lucky enough to be elected and you put your trust in me, I will continue to do what I've always done, that's fight for this. And now we have some support in all parties, so we will be pushing for this and pushing for whatever government is in, whether it's ourselves, whether it's the PCs, or whether it's the Liberals, to actually make good on these recommendations. So you can count on us for doing that. And aside to that, for people who are on the autism spectrum and their parents, you should know that the horrific news that came out is that a lot of special needs children, including those, most of whom are on the autism spectrum somewhere, have been literally sent home from schools because there isn't enough funding to actually provide educators and workers who will work with them. This is shocking. That is the state of the union right now. State of the union for those who have developmental disabilities in their families right now is that unless you're in crisis and you drop your child off at a ministry office, abandonment cases they're called, of which there were over 40 last year alone, you don't get bumped up to the top of the wait list. So this is after 11 years of Liberal rule in this province. If they were going to have done something major on this file, all the same cabinet ministers are at that table. Why didn't they do it beforehand? So please do not fall prey to campaign promises made by a government who's frightened of being defeated on the eve of the campaign when they had 11 years to act and did nothing. What else should I comment about? Line 9, I know there's some activists in this area on the environment who are concerned about Line 9. This government has said absolutely nothing. They're hands off Line 9 going through our jurisdiction. We called for an environmental assessment, which is entirely within the prerogative of the Ontario government to do. They have so far absolutely refused. So not only did they refuse on the clean trains, they're refusing on Line 9. What else? Healthcare. You should know that healthcare budgets have been flatlined. That is why the Registered Nurses Association of Ontario called this budget an austerity budget. We have been laying off and firing nurses. Contrary to what you've heard, they did not keep their promise to us in the last 2 budget cycles. Actually, the vast majority of their promises they did not keep, which is one of the prime reasons we didn't trust them to make some more and keep them. And one of those promises was about wait times for home care. That promise has not been kept, and the promise really to provide fully funded health care has certainly not been kept. Remember dental programs? Where are they? Not happening. Small business. Our small business is hanging on. I was just speaking to the owners here at the Bell Jar Cafe and others. It's a rough winter for many local businesses because of the weather. People can get out of their homes and walk around to businesses. In Manitoba, the small business tax rate is 0%. We fought to move that small business tax down to 4%. Government met us at 4.5%. Again, we're fighting with them about tax credits to hire people in small business. This is what small business needs. They actually need tax credits so that they can hire and train new employees. This is not in the offing. The government did not move on this. Trying to get through a lot pretty quickly. Collective bargaining. I was speaking to a teacher last night on the phone. This is the government that brought in Bill 115, and I know we all have collectively short memories, but that bill took away the collective bargaining rights from teachers across this province. It was as bad as anything that Mike Harris did. In fact, some say it was worse. And we were the only party to vote against it. The Ellis-Dawn bill, as I call it, that Ellis-Dawn, who funds the Liberals and the Progressive Conservatives massively, one of the biggest firms in the world based here in Ontario, wanted to get out of their collective bargaining agreement with their trade unions. They brought this bill into the House. It was passed within 2 weeks. You know, all those other bills that we wanted to see passed that never got passed, things like correcting the regulation that made it possible to have the G20 fiasco here. None of that got done, but the Ellis bill got done incredibly quickly. That was a direct attack on collective bargaining, and that was the Liberals and, again, the Conservatives teaming up together to attack organized labor. So if you are someone who cares about the rights of workers, collective bargaining, this is not your government. Neither of them are your government. Talk about ethics, because ultimately, if you can't trust what a party says they will do to actually do it, there is nothing. There's no solid ground. And really, we've come to that point with the Premier admitting that they moved the gas plants and cost you $1.1 billion that could have gone into healthcare, education. Imagine the schools that could have fixed up. Imagine the healthcare and dental programs it could have provided. Imagine the housing it could have built. No, instead it went to completely out the window to save 5 Liberal seats. The Premier admitted as much. The Auditor General said as much. There's a criminal investigation going on while we speak into this government. This is not a place to put your trust. Certainly not in the future, and certainly not for me. I mean, I expect, at the very least I expect from politicians and myself, is to, if you make a promise, you keep it. And certainly don't literally take taxpayers' money and spend it for your own partisan political purposes, and that has been going on wholesale. What are your plans to protect tenants and our rights if you're re-elected? We've passed a number of bills, myself as housing critic, for inclusionary zoning. I talked about that a little earlier in this Google broadcast. We've talked about real rent control. We've stood for that for a long time now in the NDP. We've talked about changing that condition that buildings that were built post-91 don't have rent control, and that condo tenants aren't covered by rent control. We talked about correcting that. The only party to do so, by the way, the only party that has a tenant policy, period. So if you're a tenant, we're it. When will the NDP announce a plan to pay for new transit? We've already announced it. Here's our plan. If you didn't hear it, trust me, don't believe everything you read in the Toronto Star. Can I say that? Yes, I did. Do not believe everything you read in the Toronto Star. Andrew came out with a transit policy. We stand behind this. Here it is. And as soon as possible, relief line. You heard Olivia Chow say it, and we seconded it. We need buses on the roads now, and that's something we could do almost overnight. The relief line is essential. We also propose a modest corporate tax increase to pay for that transit. That's the only way we can fund it, and a rollback of the next corporate tax. Give a billion right on their gas taxes. Ironic, isn't it? And entertainment to pay for transit immediately. Those are our promises. And of course, I talked about the train, the biggest local transit issue, the train running, circumnavigating. We want that as transit so that people get on and get off, not just go from Pearson to Union for all that money we're spending on it, and let it be electric. So we have a transit plan. More to the point, where's the Liberals' transit plan? Lots of plans, no results. 11 years later. How long do we have to wait to catch the bus? How long do we have to wait to get on a streetcar? It's been 11 years. If you're a Subway fan, how long do we have to wait for one new subway station? We have had none, just promises and promises and promises since 2003. Do not trust the promises. And that's the result. Believe, past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. 11 years without anything changing in the transit sphere, that's what we've got for it. else. What do you think of HUDAC's plan to cut 100,000 public service jobs? Obviously, listen, we are the party that has always fought for collective bargaining rights. We're the only party that has. As I told you, this is a Liberal government that voted with the Tories against collective bargaining twice. With Bill 115, attack the teachers, and with the Ellis-John bill, attack the trades. So absolutely not. To rob people of their jobs is not a way to improve the economy. It's a way to hurt the economy. So I think I've done that. Thank you for your questions, by the way. This is wonderful and unprecedented. What are you doing about the AODA's it's stalled and needs a boost? AODA, the Association for Ontarian, the Act for Ontarians, Association for Ontarians with Disability Act is the association. The Disability Act was, and here's the ridiculousness of it, doesn't kick in until 2025, but companies and organizations are supposed to have plans that they submit with the government, making themselves accessible, showing that they're working towards them. Those plans are not being tabled. Those plans probably don't exist. I have pressured this government over and over and over again. You can ask the AODA. They will tell you that I've been championing this. David Lepofsky, yay David. And right now the AODA is calling for us to have our all candidates meetings in accessible venues. I'm doing that actively and committing to that. So right now we're looking at one community organization to try to move their venues so that all the venues that we do have candidates debates in are accessible, and all venues should be accessible. That's the point of the Act. Sadly, 25 years is what it's supposed to take. Shouldn't take that long, and we're not even on course to make the 2025 cutout. That's how pathetic this is. I mean, let's put it this way: this government's track record on those with disabilities is abysmal. This is the government that took the survivors of Huronia and Rideau regional centers who were abused, took them to court. They lost, thank goodness. This government took them to a court, and we had to demand an apology. I had to stand up and ask the Premier for an apology before we got one. How will NDP stop HUDAC from cutting public service jobs? Well, very simply, the same way we have always fought back against attacks on organized labor, whether it comes from the Liberals or it comes from the Progressive Conservatives. We're the only party that's consistently voted against those attacks on labor. I just told you about the ones that have come recently. We are the only party that's put forward labor reform, which we will continue to do. Things like anti-scab legislation, only the NDP's put it forward and supports it. Remember, I'm the one who originally tabled the $10 minimum wage bill, and do not believe for a moment that there should be a minimum wage that is not above the poverty line. We absolutely will fight for labor reforms, card check certification, which we fought for ages, and again, which the Liberal government promised 11 years ago, still hasn't happened. So what are we going to do? I mean, the question is, what have we done? So again, past behavior, the best predictor of future behavior. Liberals said they were going to do something, did nothing. Continued the Harris legacy in many ways. HUDAC would be Harris revisited. What do you want? Harris light, Harris the real thing, aka HUDAC, or do you want a real alternative? And that is to vote for the real alternative, and that is to vote for us, and more specifically in Parkdale High Park, someone who will actually go in there fighting for you, who won't just be a backbencher and raising their hand to vote for whatever the government wants. Here, of course, I am the strategic vote against the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party does not have a chance in this riding, sadly to say. Historically, it probably won't this time either. You want a fighter. You want somebody who's going to take on whoever's in government, on behalf of the rights of workers, the rights of the marginalized, and of course the environment, education, healthcare. I'm coming to the end. I think, Ram, how many minutes do I have left? Am I over? I'm gone. So I have to wrap this up, because I have to get out there on the highways and byways to actually meet you at the door. So if the knock comes to your door, answer it. It may be me. Love to talk to you. See you next time on Google Hangout. Take care.